Hi, it's Angie Hooper from Happy at Law, and I want to talk to you about something that I don't hear people talk about nearly often enough. I think there's something that really speaks to our need for achievement when we are standing at the precipice of the entrepreneur journey, right? You have made the decision you're going to build your business. You feel like you're about to leap into the unknown. And so you want something tangible to show for it. And so the first thing people may do sometimes is form a corporation or a limited liability company. And I think that that can be the right decision for many businesses. But first, we want to think about whether that is the right decision, right? Having an LLC or a corporation is like adopting a dog. Actually, maybe not a dog. Maybe it's like having a house plant, right? You think you can just sort of set it aside and it'll always be fine. Like you watered it the day you got it. But actually, that LLC needs attention and caretaking, and it needs protection, and it needs to be fed in certain ways over time. There's maintenance for an LLC. There's caretaking of an LLC or a corporation, just like there is for a houseplant, right? And so if that company structure is going to give you what you need for your business, it's totally worth the time and expense and effort, and no regrets there, right? But if the way you're going to operate your business doesn't actually get any incremental benefit from having a limited liability company or a corporation structure, then you're going through a lot of expense and heartache and hassle for not much benefit. Now, a lot of what drives this decision is tax related. So here's a point where you're really going to want to have an accountant you trust weigh in on this. Or if you're a person who is savvy about the way they like to pay their taxes and the way they want the business revenue to go to them and to any other owners, then you can make a decision to rely on your own information and knowledge. But having a tax accountant or a CPA weigh in on the benefits to your business of whether you are an LLC or a corporation or a sole proprietorship is important. Because if you go to a lawyer and say, hey, I want to form a limited liability company, and here's the name I want, and here's the state I want to be in, they're going to do it for you. And they're going to charge you maybe not a ton of money, but it could be 500 bucks, 1,000 bucks, right? Don't spend that money unless you know what you're getting for it, right? Because if you go to a lawyer and say, form a company for me, they're going to say, okay. Um, Knowing that it's worth it is going to be really important. So, what the difference between a limited liability company or a corporation and a sole proprietorship is the limited liability company is its own person as far as the law is concerned, because the business is going to operate as its own person, as a limited liability company or a corporation, then it's responsible for its own actions. And the owner has limited liability for what the company does. Does that make sense? Same with a corporation. The corporation has the responsibility for its own actions, and the shareholders have limited responsibility. Now, you can undo this by mixing up bank accounts, using the business account as your own personal checking account, or not even having a business account. You can just, if you're using your own personal bank account for the business, you're probably not even going to get the benefit of the LLC anyway. So, questions you want to ask yourself include: am I willing to go through the steps and the expense to create a separate company, either an LLC or a corporation? Am I even willing to do that in the first place? Do I feel comfortable doing that or getting somebody to do it for me? Second question is, do I understand why I'm doing that? Is there either a tax benefit or a protection of my own assets that I get that I'm willing to maintain over time, right? People will create an LLC or a corporation, and then they sort of put the papers in a drawer and forget, and they don't realize they have to do a filing every year to keep that thing alive, right? Got to keep the house plan alive. They don't realize that under certain circumstances, the income from that company may come through to them personally anyway. And so why have they gone through the hassle if they're going to have to file it on their own taxes, right? Depending on how you work with your accountant. They don't realize that if they sign their contracts without the company name, they use their own name, then they may have not even gotten that protection in the first place, right? So there's certain formalities that you have to pay attention to. You have to have annual meetings, and you're like, well, I'm the only member of this LLC. Why do I have to have a meeting with myself? And yeah, you have to have a meeting with yourself once a year, right? Or you have to have some documentation that it was just you. And instead of a meeting, you ratified your own action, right? The point being, there's certain activities and actions that you have to go through to keep that LLC alive and well. Or if God forbid something happens, you have an unhappy client come in and make a claim or say you did something wrong, that LLC may not be a strong enough identity on its own to protect you. So if you don't do an LLC or a corporation, what's the other thing that that it would be, right? And a sole proprietor, many entrepreneurs who are an army of one operate as a sole proprietor. You show up and do the plumbing, you get paid by the customer, you deposit that in your bank account, you pay the tax on the money, and then you pay yourself, right? Or many artists and creators are individual sole proprietors. They show up and do the podcast and they get paid and they pocket the money. If you act as an independent contractor and provide your services that way, you may be a sole proprietor in your business. And a sole proprietor just means it's you providing a good or a service in exchange for money, and there's no other person like an LLC or a company that's engaged in the business. It's you as the individual. It's a totally appropriate way to do it if you're comfortable with being the one who's on the hook for what the business does. If you're not comfortable with that, creating a limited liability company or corporation is a great way to go. Or if you think your revenue is going to be such that there's some tax advantage, right? So if you went the sole proprietor route, what are some things to think about? And one of the things to think about is if I'm not going to use the LLC to protect my assets and myself, what else is out there? And there are contract terms you can use if you have good contracts. This is true for whether you get an LLC corporation or a sole proprietor. Having good contracts that have good language so your clients understand what they're getting and you get protected from, you know, the crazy client, the outrageous refund request, those kinds of things. And insurance, general liability insurance can be a great way to protect yourself from liability. So one of the choices that we're making as new entrepreneurs is what's the right form of business for me? Sole proprietor, limited liability company, or corporation?